Lawyers who put together wills. What is the craziest/oddest thing someone wanted to put in theirs? When my great aunt, whom I had barely any relationship with, died, I discovered that in her will, she left me a giant taxidermized silk moth that she had hanging on her wall. Evidently, someone told her about my love for bugs. I still have it, and it's one of the coolest things in my collection of odd knickknacks. She left my cousin a Furby.
We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description.
Story 2. Not a will, but a deed. The city I work for was renovating a small park that was donated to the city in the 1910s. We went looking through the handwritten deed for easements or other restrictions and found that the family could claw the property back if the park were not perpetually provided with a fountain of pleasant running water fit for consumption by man and beast alike. The family still has descendants in town, so we installed a new water fountain with a dog bowl filler just to be safe. Story 3. Here's one from one of my dad's law partners. He had a lady come in with an itemized list of books, and wanted her will to contain all of the books and who will get what based on her choosing. So basically she decides who gets what specific book instead of letting her beneficiaries decide. The truly astonishing thing is how many books and how specific they get. According to Dad's law partner, her list is at about 2,000 books to be divided among 30 people. She is apparently very specific and comes back at least once a year to add all the new books that she's gotten. Story 4. I'm the executor of my grandmother's will. I also get the house and everything in it and a share of life insurance that's split 3 ways between myself, sister, and mom. My mom has always said that all my dad, my grandmother's son-in-law, would like to have is some table. Well, in the will, there's like a whole paragraph that states how my dad gets nothing. He doesn't lay a finger on anything in the house or any money. How my dad is basically worthless and deserves nothing, and how he was a crap dad and that she begrudgingly has my mom in the will. Thanks, Grandma. I'll appreciate the awkwardness. Story 5. Not a lawyer, but my grandpa put in his will a chocolate bar for every one of his grandkids. Well, I have like 12 cousins and very difficult to track down where a couple of them went. All the estates and money he had in his will was at a standstill for months because they couldn't find a couple of my cousins. Had to show court we put in effort to hire someone to track them down and everything. The lawyer that was helping execute the will was blown away that his lawyer allowed this and why he wouldn't highly suggest to not do it. But I'm not complaining because I got a Toblerone out of the deal. Story 6. This one isn't necessarily crazy, just an interesting glimpse into the mind of a kind old woman in her 90s. My aunt and uncle, both were more like parents, incredibly beautiful people, passed away within a few weeks of one another. When my uncle became ill, my aunt tried to work on a will with her long-term lawyer, but she was kinda just old and out of it. Her main concern the entire time was small knickknacks, like a jar of pennies she wanted a distant cousin to have, or a used jacket from the 70s that she bequeathed to a sister-in-law. It was quite touching how much time she spent carefully considering each item and who would get it. Most of the items were used and didn't even really hold sentimental value. She just wanted them to go to good homes. When she passed away, everyone knew exactly who was getting each odd item. The real kicker was when the lawyer told the primary beneficiaries that she never got around to the bigger assets and all that jazz. She basically told the lawyer, pay for our funeral and anything we owe, and then family members X, Y, and Z can figure out the rest. It ended up being millions in homes, lakefront property, jewelry, antique firearms, vehicles, life insurance policies, stocks, bonds, gold coins, etc., etc. Luckily, the family is very close and everything went off without a hitch. They were amazing people who wanted to keep family items in the family. They just didn't put that much weight on their incredible wealth. They also hid their wealth amazingly. We all knew that they were very comfortable, but no one had any idea they were deep into 8-figure assets. It was just funny to see a random niece get a set of plastic cups, worn dance shoes, and a check for $125,000. This is really sweet. It shows that even with all that money, the grandmother was still really sensitive to what people would want or need. She knew the value of something purposeful as opposed to just money. That's awesome. This is a big W, Grandma. Story 7. So this is related. Worked on a divorce for a couple who fought over every single thing in the house, separating pillows and such. They were left 52 gallons of vanilla extract by her grandmother. In a secondary proceeding, he was awarded all but 5 gallons. 2 weeks later, he sent in a case of samples in Ziploc baggies to our office, along with a request to subpoena a urine test from his ex-wife to prove that she peed in the jugs before he picked them up. We never needed to, as she screamed in court that she pissed them full like he pissed all over her during their marriage. They were neat. This same couple went to court for nearly 2 years over a Beanie Baby collection. They had 3 kids. Story 8. My grandpa gave me all of his tools, which sounds dumb, but we were in the same trade and it was a real life changer. It included a lift and his old shop truck, so I pretty much got everything to start my own shop but a building. He also left me a pretty good chunk of change and his dog, Tanner, as long as I made sure his live-in girlfriend at the time got nothing at all. And I told my uncle he was fat and his wife was going to leave him if he couldn't find his pecker. There was literally a script inside the will. It all went smoothly and my uncle lost weight and Janice is a jerk, and it turns out Tanner is kind of a jerk too. But it's okay because my grandpa was also kind of a jerk. A good one, but still kind of a jerk. And they have the same mustache and eyebrows. So now I come home from work every day and get stared down by my grandpa while I poop. It really took me up until those last few words to realize if he was talking about his uncle or the dog. At least, I hope I figured it out. Story 9. Not a lawyer. Work for a will writers/trust specialist in the UK. Currently studying towards my TEP. One of our earlier clients passed away recently. Turns out the man she left almost everything to, including the residue of her estate, which was considerable, was her regular taxi driver. She had also named him as her executor. He had no clue. The woman named as her executor and main beneficiary on her previous 2 wills, a close friend of many years, was understandably flabbergasted and contested the will. We responded to her solicitor's Lark versus Nugas request, informed Mr. Taxi Driver, who didn't even know our client had passed, and the will was upheld. Aforementioned friend was left a legacy of £5,000 if I remember correctly, but her nose was clearly out of joint. Bonus observation, it takes a lot less than £5,000 being up for grabs to make families turn against each other. Can get really nasty. One of the most startling things I've learned in my short time in this business. Story 10. Not a lawyer, but I worked with plenty of estates and trust accounts over the years. This particular scenario isn't so much about the will itself being strange, but the circumstances that led up to the trust account being opened. I used to work at a bank in the estates department. I was an administrator who had to manage the files, including encroachments upon the capital. Example, I want to take some money out now, please. I had this one account, multi-million-dollar trust for one single beneficiary, the son of the deceased. What's interesting is that the son unalived the parents with a hammer in grotesque and brutal fashion. He pled insanity. He would call once a year from the penitentiary/mental hospital, requesting $50 for commissary to buy chips and gum. The call was always strange. He was very polite, very doped up. The quality of the call was always very tinny, like he was far away from the phone. Story 11. I read a lot of estate documents as part of my job. There is so much subtle shade in them occasionally, they can be pretty entertaining. One super wealthy lady had a huge section for the care and well-being of her pets, with primary and successor caretakers, as well as a certain amount of money from the trust for care and feeding of each pet. One pet owner might receive $3,000 a month to take care of one of her pets after she passed. And she also had certain stipulations on how they were cared for. While some might see it as excessive, the language and stipulations she had and how they were referred to showed that she really, really loved her pets. In that same will and trust, she also left a slew of people only $1, so that there would be no chance they could take the trust to probate court on the basis that they were merely forgotten. That part had so much subtle shade. A lot of, they know what they did, and they are well aware of their guilt in the matter, etc. Then she split up about $2 million among 5 or 6 different animal rescues and animal welfare charities. It was around 200 pages long, and I swear I read the entire thing just for the sheer entertainment value. Leaving $1 so they can't say they've been forgotten? Ooh, I'm sure they do know what they did, or if they didn't before, they're gonna figure it out. Story 12. Not a lawyer, yet, but one interesting case of inheritance law that I came across was the one of a super rich owner of a private bank, who left his shares to his sons under the condition and restraint that they will act as managers of the private bank, but with a personal liability concerning the bank's debt. So what he did was giving them the money and commit them to lifelong work in the bank, while putting their own assets at risk. So when one of the sons decides to sell his shares because he was getting old and sick, the courts had to decide whether he gets any money from the will. The condition was not fulfilled anymore as he gave up the manager position. One other son wanted to sell his shares. Of course, that would not have been allowed under the condition either. Story 13. I'm not a lawyer, but my dad put something really weird in his will. I, a 17-year-old, last year, was the recipient of a rock thrown at my head. I owe it to my dad's quirky sense of humor. and he probably thought it would be the funniest crap to ever happen. And it wasn't even any special rock, it was just one you'd find at the bottom of a river. Anyway, this year I was reading some of the stuff he had written, as I was never allowed to see the will being that I was too young at the time, and didn't think that he would end up dying. The note under my name and recipient items I was to get if he died was, "Throw this rock at me and hit him in the head with it, but make it surprising." And I was thinking, what the hell, Dad? What kind of a will is this? Then I read a little further on, and he had left a note saying that this is the rock that I had hit him in the head with when he was teaching me how to skip rocks when I was younger. And I hit him so hard that it dented his skull above his ear and it never really healed. It was the most meaningful thing he'd ever done, and after all the years me and my dad had messed around with each other, it was his way of winning and taking the final crack at me. It was so heartfelt, I was moved to tears. He got the last to laugh, and I was completely okay with it. Story 14. My own grandmother specified which of the children and grandchildren should get which of the family recipes, and somehow felt the need to include commentary about why certain decisions were made. One recipe was this Prohibition-area recipe for beer, which I knew my uncle, also a home brewer, wanted, but she left to me, with the comment that, "I know you wanted it, Teddy, but she has the second best penmanship of the girls and will make you a copy." And then like 8 pages later, among the specific descriptions of her vast collection of romance novels, there was a line. "And this book to OP, who will please subtract about half the hops before she copies the beer recipe for her Uncle Teddy, so that any of us can drink it. Our John had his IPA last summer and just about died." Uncle John just about burst into tears laughing, and Uncle Teddy had long since left the room, because he had no craps whatsoever to give about romance novels. And no, I have no idea how she got this will done. My guess is she wrote it herself, and the law students who come to her independent living building signed off on it. It was elaborate, that's for sure. Total value of the estate was well under $8,000. So it was mostly just a funny last letter from Grandma. Story 15. Had a very attractive woman with terminal cancer try to get herself stuffed by a taxidermist and given to some rich guy that had basically been a sugar daddy to her for a few months. She said, "He would give me $1 million a week allowance as long as it was in an official will that he could see." I sent her to a lawyer who I knew would do just about anything for a buck, because I didn't want to end up in the news when she died. That was 2 years ago. No clue what happened to her. Story 16. My grandmother had her breasts done when she was in her 60s. Nothing really wrong with that. But when she died, she wanted an open casket with her boobs on display. Really, Nana? She passed away at 80 and got exactly what she asked for. Granddad had ended up sticking 2 strategically placed daisies on her breasts. So she got what she wanted, and so did Granddad. Rest in peace, Granny, you silly woman. Love you. Hey, when you get a job like that done in your 60s, you don't get it done for them not to be seen. Hell yeah, Grandma. Go crazy. Story 17. Not me, but whenever I visited my old grandma in Nicaragua, it would always seem my aunts and uncles would be weirdly nice to her, almost as if she were a famous person. People would be visiting her house to greet her and strike a conversation. One day, my mother walked into my grandma's room to have a conversation with her. I remember during the flight back, 3 or 4 after the conversation, I asked her what the conversation was about. She told me that grandma used to have children that almost never talked to her, and now that she's sickly, they're trying to act nice to get stuff out of her will. My grandma wanted to talk to my mom to ask her what she wanted from the house. My mom was always the favorite growing up, since she cherished Grandma, and Grandma wanted to pay her back for being a good daughter. My mom replied with, "I don't want anything from you. I just want your love." And they both smiled at each other. Story 18. Not a lawyer, but had a very interesting experience when my grandma passed. My family has pretty much moved on from where my grandma lived, except myself and my children. Every week I went to her house for dinner. When I had my youngest, who is 1 now, she cooked me a meal every day to feed my family so I wasn't drowning. None of her other grandchildren or children spent any time with her. When she passed, there was a lot that everyone wanted, but she left everything to me. Even a stash of gold coins that she had buried in her backyard. She didn't have much, but the little things I have from her mean everything to me. It was a huge ordeal and pretty much everyone hates me, but hey, maybe they should have spent time with her. Story 19. I'm not a lawyer, currently a law student, but when I used to work as a paralegal in college, I was digitizing paper records for this new estate lawyer, who had joined our firm in a merger. One will was from 1986, and it included a provision that stipulated which of her 3 sons would be allowed to name one of their children after her. Apparently, her name had been in the family for time eternal, and she wanted to make sure that the best son was the one who carried it on. It also included a summary of why only one of them, the youngest, was worthy of the right. It was so specific and honestly pretty frickin' cruel to the other 2. Story 20. Not a lawyer, but my job has me reading a lot of wills. And I have a great one that actually led to law changes in my country. About 25 years ago, the government started working on a centralized digital land registrar. One of the companies that got the contracts, split by areas, was ours. A little simplified background on the process. 1. Citizens bring their contracts, which includes wills or any other titles they have to prove ownership. 2. We read them, document, work on them, create the maps, solve disputes. 3. We post the maps online. 4. Citizens are allowed to post objections and go to trials for ownership if there are still disputes. They are also allowed to make new claims with a fee. When we post the maps tied with contracts/ownerships online, there are always lots, fields, etc. that are empty, given to unknown because their ownership is long forgotten. And now to the will. After they posted maps on a rural area, there comes a guy that says he found his aunt's lost will, and the will goes like this. I, name redacted, am writing my last will. I want my son to take my field in location X of size 500 meters squared. I want my daughter to take my 50 meters squared house in the village. And my beloved nephew that I adore will be the new owner of my fields in locations Y with size Z. Total of 20 fields of accumulated size 50,000 meters squared. Signature X, because I don't know how to read and write. The will was handwritten. It was an obvious scam trying to gain ownership of 20 lots with unknown ownership. Ever since, the laws were quickly changed to make it harder for people to pull off such scams.